Welcome to DSM's Black Art Matter series. We're here today with Tiana Blair, who's a Dallas-based performer and director. Welcome, Tiana.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. How are you doing today?
I'm good. You know, the ice kind of outside, it got me a little scared to drive, but I made my way.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
So we're going to jump on in. So first question we always ask everyone in these interviews is, what does Black identity mean to and for you?
Black identity. Oh, gosh.
Not to throw too much at you in the first question.
Oh, boy. Just a little.
Just a little.
It's a lot. You know, I think it's definitely who I walk or what I walk into a room with. Like every time I'm in a room, I, as a very young artist, was empowered by a mentor to really take all of who I am into a room, especially when I'm creating art, because my identity is a source of creative power. And a lot of times we don't use it that way. But, you know, the art that I create, the work that I create, the perspective that I have is all because I'm a Black woman raised in Blackness, through Blackness, by Blackness, for Blackness.
Love that.
Yeah.
So that idea of having a mentor that kind of helped you gain that empowerment when you were younger, you know, we've heard stories on this series where others didn't have that. They didn't grow up with someone to say, embrace this as part of who you are. How do you think that having that helped shaped your creative identity?
Well, it helped me to see Blackness as this sort of plethora of ideas and possibilities. Whereas, like, I feel like in our industry, Blackness is always like a section, right? It's like it's the ethnic section on the shampoo aisle. You know what I mean? Like, here are the Black plays. And so quite often, I feel like Black artists are sort of like stifled by doing Black work because it feels like a section.
Right.
Whereas, like, how can I say? I see it as infinite possibilities. You know, I was talking to my husband the other day about there's a movie called, what is it called? The Lifeguard. And it's about this young white woman who turns 30 and decides that, like, she doesn't want her journalism job anymore. She wants to be a lifeguard. And I thought, Black people have been fighting to just tell stories like that.
Yeah.
You know, like, just like, what is it like to just turn 30 and want something new or want something different for your life? And see that through the view of Blackness and not necessarily always through the struggle,
right?
You know?
So taking that into consideration, you know, you as a performer and you as a director, do you find that those things, the desire to just want to tell a story ends up fighting itself in those two very different roles, to where you're handed a role as a performer versus as a director, you can really shape what that show is?
Yeah, it's a different seat.
Yeah.
It's a really different seat. I mean, as an actor, you can shape the role to be what you want it to be if you have a director who's open to it. Right. But if you have a director who comes in with the idea that's like, this character is this person, and then, I mean, I'm just a person who's like, we just gonna fight at that point. But if you come into the room as an actor and you go like, well, on the paper, this character may feel this way, or I disagree with this character, how can we lift it into a three-dimensional something else? That's kind of how I like to approach work as an actor. In a lot of rooms, I've had to be like, excuse me, this is racist. Can we find a way to three-dimensionalize this thing, or can we find a way to comment on what our playwright wrote? I know the playwright's intentions, right? But as we've progressed, we learn more. And how do we point back at the fact that we've learned from that? We've learned more since that. And so I think that art has the power to do that. Needless to say, that's what I try to do as an actor. As a director, you have more of the story in your hands. And you have a larger point of view in the process on how to shape the piece itself. And so not only can you point everybody towards what you would do as an actor, but you can sort of, you can point the work, you can sort of filter through the work of Blackness, filter through the work of my Black aesthetic that I like to create through, which is fun.
Yeah. So those moments when you raise your hand and you say, hey, this is racist, I wonder what have those moments been like in the room, and specifically through 3 different lenses. You know, the first lens being when you were a young student of this work, and then kind of your early career getting into the work, and now you're being fully solidified professionally in the work.
These are such good questions, Devon. Oh, I mean, well, as a very young artist in conservatory space, there's a balance. There's always a balance of learning what you're being taught, right? Trying to like develop craft, and understanding that you should still walk into the room with all of who you are. And some rooms, their rhetoric and their method and pedagogy doesn't even acknowledge who I am. I remember I had a conversation with a professor we were doing dialects. And we went through the entire book. There was like an index of like every dialect that this colleague of this person had put in this book. And by the end, there were no Black dialects in the book by the end of the index. And this is why it was so awkward to me, or weird, because the one dialect from the continent of Africa that was taken was Afrikaans, which is the colonizer's language. So to me, as a Black person sitting in a dialect class, I thought, did we not even think about me? Am I not even a part of the conversation?
Even part of the space at that point.
Even a part of the space at that point. And furthermore, it's quite disrespectful for a white man to go to a continent full of Black people and write about the one dialect of white people who came and colonized the land. So, needless to say, that was one of the moments where I was like, this is racist. Can we talk about it? And in those days, I felt very self-doubtful because I thought, am I talking about race too much? You know, it felt like those conversations would close everyone up in the room. And so it made me feel self-doubtful about why I was bringing them up, why I needed to bring them up, and why they were so important to me. But as I got older, I sort of understood that if I am going to be in the room, if I'm going to be in the space, and I'm expected to live to the highest potential of my artistry, we've got to address these things. And so as I moved into the professional world, I learned how to create space for those conversations, for everybody to be where they are in their journey with them. Some people are just starting. You know, there are people who approach work with race not being a factor. And so how do we make room for those people and the people who are like, hotep, you know what I mean? To have a conversation and to move forward with everybody understanding that we have to create an inclusive collective space that is not a presentation of inclusivity, like, check, we've got our Black people, check, we've got our Hispanic people, check, we've got our Asian people. But how are we allowing people to bring themselves, their art, their cultures into the space and let it shape the work itself?
Love everything you just said. Something struck me, and I think this is going to lead more into kind of your directing style too, this idea of your highest caliber of excellence and that Black excellence in artistry, right? In creating space for Black directors leading a show to give them the tools necessary to ensure that they are able to fully express their Black excellence in what's on stage. Have you, as you've gone through your professional journey directing wise, have you found those resources there? Have you found that you have to fight more for those resources than your white counterparts? And what has that journey been like for you?
I have found that the people that I have bumped into here in Dallas are very, have been open to handing me what I need, and saying, how can we be helpful to your process? Which is refreshing, and I'm extremely grateful for. I'm really grateful to, I'll just say his name, Alex Organ, who asked me to direct Mlima's Tale at Second Thought Theater. And from that moment on, that's the one opportunity that you get. That one opportunity sparks more opportunities. Right. And so you start to sort of like climb the Mario blocks of opportunity and say, how far can I go? So I would say the people in Dallas, the industry in Dallas has been very open to offering possibilities. That does not mean that we don't have more work to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I will say that the other thing about moving through this world is that I got strong Black women who are just, I can lean on a line for a minute and be like, hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Or, hey, I'm going through this. What do you think? And I found that to be extremely important as I move through the space, because when you do move into the rooms that have nonsense a part of them, you need a sounding board.
Yeah.
You need somebody to say, you are not crazy. This is what's happening. And even you've been that for me a lot, Devon. To say, no, it's
there.
It's there. You are seeing it. Go ahead and lean into it and handle it. And to also stay empowered to keep progressing in my own artistry. I think Black women are culturally and inherently taught to serve in the best way possible. It's like, how can I give? How can I give? That's sort of like culturally based in how we are brought up. And a lot of times when we move into spaces where we are running the show or cultivating the space, that is very useful, and people will try you.
Right.
And so I've had mentors who have taught me how to also be giving to the space, but to recognize my authority and to take hold of my authority. I have a mentor who's like, you need to come into the room and you need to say you're an actor, you're a director, you're a professor. And I'm like, why have to say all that? And she's like, because you have to claim it. You have to claim it, and you have to put it into space to become a colleague. And that's just what's necessary.
Tiana, you're so inspiring, I swear. In everything you say, I'm just like, yes. So having seen you in action as a director, there's something that I've noticed, and I think it also harkens back to something you said earlier about creating the most inclusive space possible, in addition to ensuring that stories we are telling that may have been written a while ago are evolving and we're learning more, right? But I've seen when you work with actors, specifically on character work, it's about the character, but also about what that actor as a person is bringing to that character. Can you talk to me about why you find that connection so important for storytelling reasons?
Yeah. Well, speaking of mentors, Dr. Cristal Chanelle Truscott, who is like a huge artistic, that woman has a lot of influence on my artistic life and progression and career. And she developed a method called SoulWork. It's derived from African American performance traditions. And so I learned under her, and I remember, I'll never forget this day. I called her one day and was like, look, I know all of these methods, right? I know Meisner, I know Bogart, I know,
Yeah.
right? But what I want to put my energy and time into is furthering this method and pedagogy. And she said, okay, I would love to invest in you that way. And so I went from not only a practitioner to a facilitator. And so I started to figure out, how can I bring this method and pedagogical practice into every space that I inhabit? Because it's useful not only for, like, we get used to the sort of like American ways of processes, but what does it look like for people to go through processes that feel culturally specific?
Right.
And it's a very culturally specific process and pedagogy that has been developed that says everybody has something to contribute when they walk into the room. In fact, you don't get to walk into the room and not contribute.
Right.
That your artistic practice is the only reason that the show will be what the show will be. And if there were different people here, it'd be a different show. If there were a different person playing the role, it'd be a different role. And so I always encourage artists to bring in, how do you see the character? What are you bringing? And let's collaborate. Everybody in the room is a collaborator,
right.
Not just me and the designers, but the actors, everybody around the table is working for a collective show. Our goal, not my show, our show. And so if I come into the room dictating how everything should be, then it's not as organic, and the potential for the work does not reach the potential that it could.
Right.
So if I'm encouraging everybody to bring in what they want to bring in to the heights of what they want to bring in, and I meet them at that same level, then we're all creating at our potential, so to speak.
Yeah. So now I'm really curious. You create such inclusive spaces when you're creating these works. As a director, how do you then balance out the fact that your audiences are largely majority white, specifically here in Dallas? And what does that combat look like to you as a director?
Well, sometimes you've got to say, or I've got to say, I'm going to do it and I can't care. I can't care. What I can do is say, I'll say this in SoulWork, the very base, one of the base pillars in SoulWork is call and response, because as we know, enslaved people, that's how they worked in the field. So that's how we create art. And so the show is a call to the audience. How they respond is how they respond. We did a show, I was on tour with Cristal's, my mentor, who I just mentioned, her touring ensemble called Progress Theater. And we were in New York, and we were doing a very intimate show. It was like a small piece of the show. It might have been like 6 or 7 people in the room. And most of these people were white men in like suits. And to this day, I've never asked, like, who are these people? Like, where'd they come from? Where did we get this audience? Like, how did we develop this audience? But I remember saying, and this show is about Black people, finding their way through socioeconomic problems and the potential of what they could have been. And so dealing with those problems in front of white men, for me, was sort of a moment of pushing through the fear of telling the truth, of telling my truth. And I remember after the show, I literally, like after the last note of the show, bawling. And she came over to me and she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes, that was just hard." And she said, "But you did it. But you did it." And so I will say it's always going to be hard for everybody, right? Like, to hear anybody's truth is going to be hard. But the idea is that if you don't do it, then what?
Yeah. So, sticking with developing audiences of tomorrow, I would love to know your perspective. From your point of view, is it more pressing at this moment that we tell more diverse stories on our stages for our white audiences, or to try to redevelop who our audience spaces are to reflect what our communities look and sound like?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do with Progress Theater when we are on tour is to develop our audiences. And so what we'll do, all credit to Dr. Truscott, is we'll be in a city for like a week. We'll all meet up. We're sort of like based. There are some folks who are Houston based, Mississippi based, Chicago based, but we'll meet up in a city for a week. We will do a residency throughout. So we will do workshops at like a YMCA or some sort of community organization. We'll link up with several community organizations, and we'll do small snippets of the show for each organization in hopes of pulling together an audience to come see the show. The goal with that is to make sure that we are courting an audience of community people who are not your average theater goers, right? We think of like theater as this like elitist thing, like going to the theater. But theater belongs to the people. And I think what I love about the impetus of going to all of those community organizations is not only to say, how can we get as many different people in the room together, from race to religion to ethnicity to gender expression to sexual orientation? How can we get as many different people in a room together to have a same experience and then to talk about it? Right? Because that's the other thing I would say about audiences is that very rarely with Progress Theater do we not have a talk back. And I think lots of people do talk backs. Everybody is familiar with talk backs. But the idea with a SoulWork talk back is, how do we get different people talking to each other? How do we get them talking to each other about the truth of what they feel, what they felt, what they noticed, and how it changed them? So that's one part. The other part is to see, when we think of diverse stories, it's like, we need as many different people on stage so everybody can feel represented, which I think is useful. What I enjoy is seeing a culturally specific perspective on stage that reminds me that my life is just a little piece of the world. And everybody has a perspective that lives right alongside mine. And I think that is the thing that opens people up to start to empathy.
So, Tiana, how do we get our industry to move further in that direction? I mean, we're sitting in, the beautiful music hall at Fair Park where we present the best of Broadway, but the best of Broadway is often the best of white Broadway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What is your thought? What is your advice for this industry? How do we change this industry for the better?
Well, one, I feel like I am never thinking about making a product when I make a show. Now, industries are industries, and making money is making money. However, my artistic impetus is not about that. And so I feel like if you are focused on telling the story, then you are focused on who needs to tell the story and why the story needs to be told. And that it just starts from a whole different intention. And if you can start from a different intention, the outcome is totally different. Therefore, the viewers, totally different.
Right.
How you approach the work, how you market the work, the intention drives every action that comes thereafter. And so if you can focus the intention, then the work is different, the people are different, the artists are different, the viewers are different, so forth and so on.
And I think that's what I have enjoyed about working with you so much and seeing you work, is that you've always gone into it with that lens of the artistry, not the profit, right? It's about what are we doing and what are we telling, rather than what are we making at the end of the day,
Right?
in our bank. Yes, we have to stay afloat, but those two things are not mutually exclusive, which oftentimes they seem to live. So I'm gonna take a quick turn here,
Do it.
and talk a little bit about advocacy and the role that artists play in advocating not only for ourselves but for our broader communities, right?
Yeah.
As a very strong Black woman in the work that you do, what do you strive to push forward, I guess, through your work from an advocacy perspective to ensure that those coming after you will have a place to raise their hand and say, hey, this is racist?
that when they raise their hand and say, hey, this is racist, no one shrivels up, but that everyone goes, okay, let's talk about it. I feel like my husband and I talk about this quite often, is like, what is our generational responsibility, right? Like if Harriet freed the slaves, and if Marcus started the Back to Africa movement, and if Malcolm started civil rights and Martin started civil rights, what is our generational responsibility to advocacy? And I think for us, for our parents, it has been, certainly for my parents, it's just been like, get to do what you want to do in life, not have to find some way to support a family or support people, but what do you want to do in life to propel us socioeconomically to a point where we could just live in the country and be who we want to be in terms of potential. For me, because I get to be an artist, because of their generational responsibility, I feel like my generational responsibility is to normalize what it means to talk about race, what it means to face racism, because that is the thing that's like, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day that clearly felt like, well, this person is not a bad racist person. And I thought, well, that's, if you're looking at racism that way, sure. But if we think about racism as a system, not as a malice intention, then we understand that we have all been filtered through a racist system. We have all been cultivated. Our brains have been conditioned in a way, our bodies have been conditioned in a way that we all have to reckon with.
Yeah.
And if we understand that, then we understand how to approach the entire subject in a totally different way. It's not to say I'm a bad person and I did something bad, but it is to say, why did I do that, and how was I taught that, and how can we reverse it? Yeah. So that's my generational responsibility. That's what I feel.
Love that answer. And speaking of racist systems, and I feel like I have to ask, I've asked this question before of other guests, but it feels more relevant now that we're starting to somewhat get into a normalcy pace when it comes to knowing when we can reopen our theaters and have live productions again. A year ago, literally almost a year ago, next month, our industry shuttered.
Yeah.
And then there was the murder of George Floyd. And then specifically here in Dallas, there were several theaters who put out statements saying, we recognize this is now a catalyst for us to be better and to change when we get back. So my question to you, two questions really. One, do you think that change is we're going to see that change in action once our theaters are back up and running? And two, what is the responsibility of Black artists to say we are watching?
First, let me say I was very angry that it took a video of a police officer kneeling on a black man's neck for those statements to come out.
Right.
I was angry that it took yet the loss of another black body for that realization to be realized. However, I will say that if we keep viewing it in that way, because this is why it made me angry, is we saw malice intent and then that made us do something. But a lot of people still don't recognize the system that allowed a need to be set on a black man's neck. That is the thing, right? It's not like, we've got to get those bad apples. We've got to get our racist white people intact. Like, that is not how I view this thing. It's more about what is the system that has allowed that to happen. And for so many of those people who have done such harm to black bodies to walk away free. And so, number one, if it is going to change, then we've got to see racism as a system and not as malice intent. We can't wait until black bodies are falling in the street to then decide, we need to think about black people. Or their inclusivity or their equity. And then what was the second question?
What do you believe is our responsibility as black individuals to keep our eye out and to continue making the point that you've made that it's a system-wide issue, the system needs to change?
I think it's our job to keep speaking out, speaking up, to take up space. It's our job mostly to take up space. And I'll give an example because I hate when people are just like, what do you mean take up space? But we all know code switching, right?
Girl, yes.
I get it. I get it. And it's a mode of, it's a tool of survival, right? Of being understood, of translation. However, I'm tired of translating. And if I get to bring my whole self into the room, that means I get to say I'm Gucci, and you know what I mean. That means that I get to say, what's up? And you don't have to say what's up back to me.
Right.
You can speak to me exactly how you speak, but I'm not going to make you comfortable. I'm not going to bend and shape myself. I'm not going to lock my blackness away to make you comfortable, but you will learn how to be in space with the full me, because that's the only way that I can create to my fullest potential.
Oh, Tiana, yes, on so many levels. I am here for it. I'm living for it. So one last question I have for you as we wrap up today, and that is, you talked about what your generational responsibility is, what our generational responsibility is, and it being that idea of being open and more comfortable with talking about race and making it not this taboo, like, oh no, here we go. What are your hopes for the generation after us and what their generational responsibility might be if we fulfill our generational responsibility?
Well, the goal is freedom. The goal is freedom. And I think that can be contextualized with every generational step. It's like, how do we get closer to freedom? And so if the level of freedom that I can get my people to is like, we don't shrivel up, then maybe the goal of freedom for Gen Zs or whomever after is to be able to create the movie about the black woman who just wants
to change.
Who just wants to change, who just wants to change. And that's happening, right? That's happening. But it's revolutionary when it happens.
Yeah.
And I wait for the day when it's not revolutionary, when it's just what it is.
Yeah. Well, Tiana, thank you so much for being here with us today. I am inspired and I think have a bucket list of things I need to, the work has to keep going. And you just reminded me of all of that. And it's like, it doesn't stop, but it can't stop. And we need to keep moving this work forward. So thank you for being here and lending your voice to us and to DSM. We are so appreciative of you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited and honored to be here and be with you. You're such a good interviewer, Devon.
It's easy to talk to someone when they are who you are, this powerful, beautiful Black woman. So thank you again for being here with us and lending your voice.
Thank you.